Undivided Learning. Today, we'll be talking about some essential elements of accessibility for our children, accommodations, modifications, and the fine line between the two. And what are the implications when that line is crossed? We're going to find out. I'm Lindsay Crane, and I head the content and community teams at Undivided. With me today, we welcome back educational advocate, owner of No IEPs, and lucky for us, a frequent contributor to Undivided, Dr. Sarah Pelangka. Hey, Sarah, good to see you as always.
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year, right? This is our first one together.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, 2022 has already felt eternal. So yes, Happy New Year. So Dr. Pelangka.
Yes.
Accommodations and modifications. So these terms are frequently used interchangeably or incorrectly sometimes. So can you explain the basic difference between the two and give us some common examples of each?
Yeah, so I think the kind of overarching word is adaptations, right? So how can instruction be adapted? And the underlying goal being that how can it be adapted to ensure that the student is able to access the general education curriculum? And so accommodations are less intrusive, right? And that would be changing how the student is accessing the curriculum. It's not changing what they're learning, but it's changing how they are showing that they understand what's being taught to them, basically. And it can also be accommodating how the instruction is presented to them or the content is presented to them, but it's not changing what is being presented to them. Whereas modifications would in some way, shape, or form be altering either the instruction or how the student is responding. There's input and output, right? How it's being taught, the curriculum. So it's changing what the student is learning in some way, shape, or form. So we have accommodating, changing how they're accessing same content, modifying, changing what that content is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful for if you could give us a scenario, using an accommodation and then explain what would have to happen for that to cross the line and become a modification.
Yeah, so hopefully, in my mind, this is an easy one, but oftentimes there's, for instance, reading or access to a novel that's being read or studied in a class. So an example of an accommodation could be that instead of reading that book, to themselves, they may have an audiobook or they may have it read aloud to them. Whereas a modification would be they have a modified version of that text. Maybe it's, shorter chapters and it's really just getting straight to the point, the main idea of the text. And so that's really the difference between how you can accommodate access to that content and that novel versus completely modifying access to that content in that novel.
So what if a student receives a reduced workload and the option to present his work in a different way, meaning audio or voice to text versus written, but the course level content is grade level and unchanged? Is that an accommodation?
So hopefully I'm following, and I will give you guys a fact about me. My listening comprehension is not great, so it's helpful.
And I talk fast.
Okay, the second part of the question you said was if they can, I think, dictate or hear it. Those are accommodations. Yeah. So another example of a common accommodation is for a student who maybe struggles with writing, be it handwriting or typing, just getting the thoughts out in a written form. They can have a scribe, so they can dictate their response to a scribe, or they can have speech to text. They can dictate their response to the computer. I think that was part of the question. The first part, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, it was the reduced workload. Yeah, and that was really the only extra.
So reduced workload can kind of go either way. So a common accommodation, I would say a frequent reduced workload accommodation would be like in math. You'll see maybe every other problem or only the odd problems, only the even. And so what we really try to, with my clients, encompass and capture is ensuring that the student has access to every type of problem, because sometimes at the bottom, there's only one extra word problem. And then if they have every other, they don't get the word problem at all, for example. Mm-hmm. So as long as the student is accessing all types of content and showing and reflecting that they can produce understanding or mastery of all of the content, but say they're doing fewer problems, that's an accommodation. Whereas if they have a reduced workload and they're not being asked to reflect mastery of all of the standards, right, or the content, that would be a modification. So does that make sense? I just feel like reduced workload is like a broad statement. So there is a modified version and an accommodated version, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, just throw those in the chat if any of that didn't make sense or you want any clarifications. And I know we'll get to some more examples in a bit, and feel free to throw any examples you want in the chat, because I know it helps me. I think it helps a lot of people to sort of talk through the real world scenarios. But I did want to jump in first on accommodations. So what are some of the most common accommodations that you've seen used to ensure that a child can access their curriculum?
Yeah, again, a pretty big question. There's, I think, a plethora of pretty common standard, if you will, accommodations that you kind of see across most IEPs, preferential seating or seated near the teacher to maybe ensure the student is less distracted. Another common one would be like the reduced workload, extended response time or increased verbal response time, extended time on tests, extended time on assignments, access to movement breaks or access to breaks, frequent breaks. Those are all, pretty common ones. Others under like teacher directions that I see often: frequent checks for understanding, directions presented in a variety of ways, pairing the visual with the verbal directive, again, audio books, scribes, access to manipulatives. All of these things are not changing what the student is learning, but they're changing how the student is able to access that content, right? And some of those examples when I have, my clients like to highlight making sure that they're worded really specifically, like for extended time, how much time, to make sure that teachers are really translating that and understanding what that means. And it's not left up, it's not subjective, if they need extended verbal response time, again, how much time are we expecting the teacher to wait? One teacher might wait 2 seconds and one teacher might wait 10 seconds. So what are we expecting? That's important information. Movement breaks, are these for a sensory need, or is it, what is the purpose and what should those look like? So, the standard drop down kind of accommodation that comes up isn't necessarily always going to be individualized for that particular student's needs. So really making sure they're as subjective as possible, and that they really clearly articulate kind of the purpose of that accommodation. And I think another thing, sorry, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but making sure they never say as needed. As needed should never be written into an IEP. It should be clear, like, when is it needed, or should it always be accessible, right? Because then again, it's subjective. Who's to determine when it's needed? And lastly, another common kind of mishap, that's not the right word I'm trying to think of right now, but maybe confusion is the student responsible for requesting the accommodation, or is the teacher supposed to be the one to offer the accommodation? And so looking for that in your IEP as well. Does it say upon student request? And if so, if that's not the intent, because there are students who need to start learning to self-advocate, especially in the higher grades, then really making sure you correct that in the IEP if that's not what the expectation is.
Because if you have a child maybe who is nervous, or they don't know how, or they don't know why, we don't want someone else, a teacher, coming back and saying, well, they didn't ask for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that happens all the time.
Yeah. We also had a follow-up to something you said before, but I think it goes in here perfectly. Someone asked regarding word problems, which you had mentioned, if someone is helping them break it down, is that a modification?
Regarding word problems, like for example, the math word problem, if someone is prompting them or maybe chunking it, is that a modification? No, I mean, again, if we're talking about during the work piece, like during assignments and working through, if they just need that kind of guidance, and they're still producing the work on their own, and they're still, doing the same content that the rest of the class is doing, it's not modified. It would be accommodated. Maybe they need redirection, or they need it chunked, or they need, highlighting of keywords, but ultimately working towards being able to do it independently. Yeah, I don't consider that a modification per se. And again, that's listed in your accommodation dropdown, redirection to task, chunking, prompting.
I would love to know some of the most unique accommodations that you've seen. And if anyone out there has any, anything that's worked in your child's IEP, I think it's good for all of us to hear. Of course, everything's individualized, but throw it in the chat window. We'd love to hear. But Dr. Pelangka, some of the things maybe that parents don't automatically think about if they're thinking about accommodations, that they should.
Some of the most unique, or I would say maybe more individualized is the better word. I don't know. I think obviously it always depends on the student, but we add things in like obviously self-monitoring visuals. And again, it's usually it just says self-monitoring checklist, and it's more specific to what the purpose of that is. So self-monitoring for raising their hand, or whatever that is. Organizational visuals at the student's desk or an organizational system is one that sometimes is used and can be helpful. Also, agenda checks with teacher initials, so that parents know when they're getting those home that it's correct, because that's often they don't know if what their student is writing is accurate or not. And nowadays, with things being more online on like Canvas and Google Classroom, just having like the directed studies teacher be responsible for verifying that the student has that, correctly, either a photograph of it or written down. That's another one you can put in the accommodations page. A student is allowed to take photos of like the assignments due in each class. That's kind of a unique one. Allowing the student to have earbuds in is one that could be considered unique. That could be like a calming strategy, especially for kids that have like ADD. Sometimes just having that mechanism helps them actually to focus, where sometimes teachers think it's the opposite, right? And there was another one in my head and now I'm forgetting it. There's so many, but really just looking at whatever your student needs in order to be successful in accessing, but the least amount necessary. And also ensuring that, if accommodations are needed to ensure to ensure the student can meet their goals, that those specific accommodations are also translated into the goal, so that it's clear that whenever they're tracking data and progress on that goal, the student should have always had those things accessible to them while they're tracking that data. Because, you'll hear districts or the team say a lot of times, well, that's already on the accommodations page. But if it's also written into the goal specific for that goal you're targeting, then it really holds the staff accountable for really making sure they had the highlighters when they were working on identifying the main idea, and they had the graphic organizer, and they had, whatever else they need while we were looking at their performance on this skill and tracking this data.
That's a great point. I mean, for so many things, supports accommodations, write them into the goals. So it's very clear. We also had somebody just want a clarification. Can you get modifications as part of 504s or only with IEPs?
That's a good question. Accommodations are primarily what 504 covers. Sometimes you can actually get standalone services on the 504 as well. So like counseling, for example, but modifications wouldn't be part of the 504 plan. That would come just strictly through an IEP.
But how can parents envision what's possible, or really what their kids need? When we're not therapists, like the things you're saying, they make sense, but what can parents do to really figure out, or should the IEP team come with all of those ideas in their head?
Yeah, so there's definitely not an all-encompassing menu, but there are a number of sites out there that actually have a pretty extensive list of accommodations and different types of accommodations. I know out here for our SELPA in Ventura County, the IEP template actually breaks it down across 6 different types of accommodations, if you will. So it has teacher directions, student response, personal care, setting, organization. And when you go into the IEP, there actually are drop downs that you can ask them to go through, so you can see all the different items that they could potentially put in there, but it's definitely not all exhaustive. And I've actually had IEP teams tell me, oh, well, that's not in the drop down, so we can't add that. And I was literally had to say, well, actually, you can type into it. So be aware of that trick. Functionally
and, legally, you can type that.
But an accommodation, again, it's really just based on, I mean, you always at the end of the day know your child best, better than any specialist out there. So yes, it's true that you may not know all the fancy jargon or the terminology, but you know your child. And so if there's ever something you think could potentially help them to access, just throw it out there. Like, hey, what about something like this? And it definitely will, if nothing more, start a discussion as to whether or not it is an accommodation. Maybe it's a modification and maybe that's not what you're wanting, but at least, you know, any ideas you have, just throw them out there. And like I said, there's a number of websites out there if you just type in, you know, sample accommodations, and a number of great books as well.
So we're talking about the difference between the two. And the really important question is, you know, what are the implications of having classwork modified?
So the difference between the two, again, is just changing how they're able to show their knowledge or how they are able to access the content versus accessing something different altogether, right? And so when you're talking about modifying, you're really talking about changing what the student is learning at that point. And so there's definitely like milder, you know, modifications, if you will, that maybe aren't even necessarily going to be in place long term. And so an example of that, you know, could be like using a calculator for calculation, you know, and ultimately maybe they won't need to do that, but for now it's just something like that they need to access. So it's not necessarily the case that if your child's work is being modified, it means like that they're, you know, the gap is going to widen and they're never going to get caught up for sure. And it's just going to get bigger and bigger. However, I do think that once modifications start to occur, the likelihood of that happening is much higher, right? Because it is changing what your child is accessing in terms of, you know, content. And so there are different types of modifications. You know, are we talking about modifying curriculum? Are we talking about modifying the instruction? You know, are we talking about altering completely the curriculum? So I think, you know, it depends on kind of the pervasiveness of the modification. But the earlier it happens, the higher the likelihood that it can be harder for your child to stay caught up and to be able to continue to access general education curriculum. And so I always say, and I know, Lindsay, I've said this to you many times, that whenever those conversations occur, be that, you know, first grade, second grade, simultaneously, I think parents should be informed that if we're talking about a severe or a significant change to like a completely modified, altered curriculum, know that should that continue, you know, through higher grades, that we could potentially be looking at a difference between diploma and certificate of completion. And I think too often parents aren't aware of that, you know, piece of the discussion. And then it does become the case that, oh, now we're in high school and I had no idea that, you know, that could not be a possibility anymore.
And when you're talking about the different levels of modifications, does it matter if it's modified curriculum or if it's a temporary modification? Do all of those have the same implications of like, and we'll get a little more into the graduation requirements later, but if you, any of those modifications and you're getting those in high school, does that mean you're not going to earn a diploma?
No, absolutely not. So it's definitely, you know, possible for students to be in general education and have, you know, smaller level modifications to their curriculum, and only even maybe in just one subject, right? So maybe their struggle is really mostly with math, for example. And so maybe the rest of the class is already working on division, and for, you know, for math, your child is still kind of working on multiplication. So that's technically modified. They're not working on, you know, necessarily the same standard as the rest of the class. Maybe they're a grade level behind at this point, but they're still able to remain in the class on a little, you know, modified work with, you know, the possibility that they still may be able to catch up and whatnot. And so absolutely not. It's possible for students to have modifications and, you know, not necessarily then not be able to access like a diploma later on. You know, maybe they get to a point where they no longer need those modifications.
And if you need the modifications in elementary and middle school, it's not affecting anything, right? Like you said, the gap. I mean, the results of if you're not, you know, getting access to grade level standards, you know, throughout the years is obviously going to have, you know, a huge ripple effect. But legally, it really matters once they get into high school, right? Am I
So
interpreting
yes and no. I think it depends again on the level of the modification. So there's a difference between, sorry, my dog. There's a difference between talking about a student in elementary school, like I said, who's in general education and is just working on maybe accessing the grade level standard, but with not a grade level tech or book, or versus a student in elementary school that's being placed on a completely alternate curriculum. And so I would argue that when that happens, which is a much more significant level of modification, being on an alternate curriculum or a functional skills curriculum, whatever your district refers to it as, there's a much higher likelihood that that gap is going to widen much quicker. And I do think that, parents need to be aware that it's going to be really challenging for your child to be able to close that gap if they continue on that road by the time they're in high school. And then you cannot access a diploma if you're not able to, reflect mastery of grade level standards and access the grade level curriculum at that point. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I have a follow-up to that in just a minute, but I wanted to also just really touch on something that you said a minute ago about a lot of parents are approached in their IEPs when their kids are maybe kindergarten, but sometimes first and second grade, second grade, especially third, as they're starting to test. And districts are pushing them to be on a certificate track at that age. So what do you recommend parents do, even if they don't know if that's going to be a possibility for their child, but they're uncomfortable, right? Even if that feeling, what do you recommend parents do?
So I don't think that districts should be, saying to parents, we need to make that decision now in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. I don't think that's the appropriate time to have the discussion as far as, just so you know, we need to make a choice between the certificate track or the diploma track. What I do think should be happening is, if the team, the school-based team is recommending a move to an alternate curriculum that early on, that they explain the potential implications of that your child is not going to be accessing general education curriculum. This is what the curriculum is going to look like. A common curriculum, a popular one that you see is like unique. And I'm constantly asking in the IEPs, knowing the answer, okay, so when you're looking at present levels, what grade level is this student at? Like, and compare, what grade level content are they accessing? And that's one of the big problems with unique is it's not based on grade level, it's strands. And so it's not a, anyways, I digress. That's a whole separate situation or conversation. But point being, if they're not working towards any specific grade level, then what does that speak to in terms of what your child is doing at school and in the classroom, right? And if you can't tell the parent what grade level they're performing at or what grade level content they're accessing, then what are they doing in the classroom? And how are they ever going to be able to have the opportunity to catch up? So if that's starting to happen as early as kindergarten, first and second grade, then I think the bigger concern is, or question in parents' minds is, and should be, if it's not, is what are we doing to ensure that my child is going to be able to work towards, accessing that grade level curriculum, and not just giving up on that child and just kind of saying, well, this is where we're putting them and this is where they're going to stay. Because if there is no expectation of them to continue to work towards those standards and or okay, let's say your child's in fourth grade but they're at first grade right now, and they can't tell you after they move them to the functional skills class, now she's at second grade or she's made a year's growth, and they're just saying, well, she's in this strand. That's not really it's not really showing that they're working towards any substantial progress. And so the gap widens, and it widens significantly. And I just feel like, the law says that, students have the right to their least restrictive environment, and moving them to a completely different curriculum, and which is obviously now at that point, generally a separate environment. It's an SAI class, is pretty restrictive. And then you're taking away that student's opportunity to really work towards the opportunity to be in a diploma track ultimately one day, because the expectations are lessened. And that's not fair to the student. And definitely the earlier that happens, it's hard. And I feel like everything should be done. Well, I don't feel like, the law says everything should be done before we get to that point, right? And I just think that's where it becomes hard for parents, is how do they know that everything's already been done, right? How do they know what else could be done? That's the hard part.
Do you think that that happens frequently because staff and teachers aren't properly trained to know how to modify and include kids that might have more significant support needs? And so it's an easier thing to say, we're going to put you on, we're going to put you on this different track instead of supporting you at grade level standards, in all the ways that are possible.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a loaded question. I think there's a lot of reasons why it happens. And I think that I don't think putting the onus on the teachers necessarily is fair, because I think, what about their credentialing programs, right? Yeah. Like, why are we not having gen ed teachers and teacher candidates and sped teacher candidates in the same program from the get-go and doing the same stuff? And so they're all exposed to the same stuff. Like, that's been a question in my mind since I did my credential. Some of the things I heard from gen ed teacher candidates when we went in and bombarded them with an IEP student was just mind-blowing. And I thought in my head, oh my God, these people are going to be teachers. And they just said that. Like, I think it starts from there. I think it starts obviously from funding, the lack of ability and access to training, and just time. Right now with COVID, everything is just a mess. There's just so many factors. I also think, to your point a moment ago about third grade and state testing, if you're, have kids in gen ed classes and doing state testing, and that's a reflection of the reviews of the schools, that speaks to a lot of it too, as far as timing, oftentimes, of when we start to see this recommendation for pushing these kids out. Because what happens with state testing, when students are on an alternate curriculum, generally they are then moved to an alternate state test. And so it's just a lot of interesting factors, right?
When my daughter in her third grade, other parents just warned me. They're like, this conversation might start coming up in your IEP. And you talk to a lot of parents in the same situation. And that is when it comes. So know that that conversation might come up, but in no way do you have to make a decision when your child is that young.
Absolutely.
If you want them learning the state standards, then they can do that with modification.
Yeah.
Or
and
accommodations, whatever's appropriate for them.
An inclusion specialist, I mean, that should be like a position that every district has on deck, at least one. Most should have more than one, and it's like unheard of. So, I mean, there's just a lot of factors that, I think could help.
Yes. And it's important for us to continue talking about them, just because, everyone needs to start having the conversation and pushing for change. And there seems to be a lot of assumptions. Obviously, we're hitting on a lot of those about modifications, and standard practice can be stated like it's fact or law, when in fact it's, really just a bad, dangerous habit. So we'd love to clear up some of these assumptions. And so we're going to play a little game of true and false. So if you're listening, write your answers in the chat window, and then, Dr. Pelangka is going to tell us why these are true or false, common things that we hear. So some think that, we've already kind of touched on alternate curriculum. So some think that you can only receive modifications if you're on an alternate curriculum. Is that true or false?
False. Am I supposed to elaborate, or just?
Yes. Elaborate, please.
If you have modifications in a general education class, when you're, like I said earlier, they can be minor modifications, like having access to a calculator during math. So no, that's false. My dog's going to start barking. And, again, in our SELPA, on our template, and really in any IEP, the team is supposed to go through the hierarchy of placement, and the least restrictive would be placement in a general education classroom with, modifications or accommodations, consult, collab. So no, that's false.
Yeah. And sadly, something frequently that a lot of parents I know hear. So, okay, next, if your classwork or homework is modified, you're automatically on certificate track. True or false?
If your classwork or homework is modified, like a true modification, I would say no, false, because again, modifications don't necessarily stay in place indefinitely. It could be some sort of minor modification, but as long as the student is able to pass the course with a passing grade and they're, meeting whatever the requirements are for passing that course, and working towards whatever the diploma standards are, then they would be able to access a diploma. It's they still have to show that they are able to master the grade level standards and that they're able to complete whatever the requirements are for the diploma, but you can still have modifications and be able to do that.
And I know we've said that several times, but I think it's important for people to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're in a mild to moderate special ed class, that means your work is modified and you will be certificate bound. True or
false?
False.
And so mild to moderate, and again, terms are not necessarily always the same across districts and states, but here, when we refer to mild to moderate classes, that's a general education curriculum, just at a slower pace, as a smaller class size. Obviously, student has access to any necessary accommodations, and they may have some, again, minor modifications, but the curriculum itself, meaning the curriculum they're accessing, is still the general education curriculum. So students who are in high school who may be in a mild to moderate SAI class would still be on a diploma track.
Really, really important thing to point out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what about, and I hate these labels, but that's what they're called a lot of schools. So what about the mod to severe or the life skills class?
So that is that a true false question? Or
no, that was a follow-up question.
Students that would be in what we would refer to again here, as a moderate to severe classroom that would be on an alternate curriculum. I'm assuming you're referring to in high school, would not be diploma bound. That is not access to general education curriculum. Therefore, they wouldn't be working towards the requirements for a diploma, just merely due to the fact that they aren't accessing that or being asked to produce that level of work in those classes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it's also important to point out, what's your dog's name, Sarah?
Oh, Koa. Let me just get
Oh, that's right. Koa. Koa likes to talk during our Facebook lives as well. Koa wanted to join. That's great. But I think it's also important to point out that if a child starts like in a mod to severe class, elementary, and the parents, because I know a lot, right, that are fighting to get them out and into a different class, obviously, just because you're starting, and we've talked about the longer you're there, obviously, the further they're going to be behind because they're not being given access. But just because you're starting there, if you don't want your child to be there, you can fight, you can make sure, that they are getting grade level standard, exposure in whatever way they can, right? So just because you're starting there, don't think in your mind, there's no hope.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can always fight for your child. That's not to say that you can just go into the meeting and make it change like that. I mean, in the state of California, it is an IEP team decision. Things cannot happen without your consent, but I always kind of express to parents that once something does happen, in order to undo that, if you will, it also requires their consent, right? Unless you end up in due process or what have you. So that's again why I think parents just need to be as informed as possible and know as much as possible before that change happens, because unfortunately I do see in my work that it's harder to go back than it is to obviously put students in those placements. It's not to say that it's not possible, but it does require, the team's consent.
Of course. And by the way, Koa is getting some shout outs in the Facebook comments. So that's going to make everyone's Thursday better. Look at that face. Okay. Another true and false. If you receive modified grades, you can't earn a diploma. True or false?
True. I mean, again, if I understand, so if you're receiving a modified report card or you're being graded on, and this frustrates me the way this is kind of worded in the law, but basically if a student is on an alternate curriculum, let's say, and they're in those, what we just said, like a functional skills class or whatever the district refers to it as, the law kind of leaves it up to the district's discretion as far as how the student is to be graded. And so I've seen things like graded on effort, like, what does that even mean? But they're there, so they pass. Graded on, fewer, standards, or there's different options, but it's just really frustrating, I feel. And I feel like our law needs to kind of be beefed up in terms of what are we holding these educators accountable for in terms of what they're educating our children in and on, and also what are the expectations of our children. And they still should be graded, and they still should be held accountable, and they should still be going to school and learning. And so, yeah, unfortunately, if your child is receiving a modified or alternate report card, I'm assuming that's what you mean, they would not be on the diploma track, because again, you have to be able to meet the grade level standards and pass all of the necessary requirements to access a diploma.
So if your work is being heavily modified and you're in a gen ed class, are you automatically put on an alternate report card, or can you still earn
A diploma.
typical report card even if your work is being heavily modified?
Well, if your work is being heavily modified in a gen ed class, you would probably not. I mean, I don't know, that would, I guess, be a discussion up to the team. I think it would depend on, are they still working towards grade level standards? So again, are they in a high school class, let's say high school English gen ed class, and the class is working on, oh gosh, I'm not going to use the right text, the Hunger Games, which I know is not a high school level text, but let's just pretend it is. And your child has an abridged version of that, a kind of a less intensive version of it, fewer words, much shorter, but they're still able to, show that they understand, the story. And maybe they also listened to the audiobook with that. I think that could be open for discussion as far as whether or not they're able to receive and pass the class. It just depends on how much modifications are occurring. Sorry, I don't know that there's a black and white answer to the question. It just depends.
Well, and when you said before about, are they getting a modified grade on effort? Is there something that parents should think about if their children are, or maybe, the team is talking about modifying grades? Is there language that parents should consider putting in about what they are getting graded on, so there is still a standard?
Yeah, I think, in our meetings that I have those discussions, we always obviously push to have the student graded on, obviously their goals should be considered, and making sure the goals are written to show substantial growth. And obviously it's a case by case basis, but not just life skills, there's social growth and there's academic growth, and that depends on the family too, what their priorities are for their child as far as their education. But definitely putting in language as far as what you want that grading to be based off of. So like out here, there's a drop down. And so I always make sure it's personally never on effort, and that there's some higher level of expectation for the student. So we usually put fewer standards or modified standards. But I think every other district I've seen actually doesn't have that, and they just type it in. And so that can be frustrating. And so as a parent, or if you have your advocate, definitely pushing for and asking the team, how is my child being graded? What are they being graded on? When you're receiving the report card, if it's an alternate report card or whatever your district calls it, making sure you're kind of questioning that, and asking for data. I love data. So show me the data that supports this grade. What is this grade based off of? What is your child producing? What are they doing while they're at school, particularly if they're in, on an alternate report card, right?
Yeah. And we also had a parent ask, she said, how should gen ed teachers grade her child if they receive, modifications or accommodations? She said their teachers regularly struggle with how to grade amidst the unadapted work of other kids.
Well, so accommodations should never reflect an alternate or any type of modified report card whatsoever. So there's that piece. Accommodations don't change that your child is working towards the same standards, nor does it change the curriculum that your child is working, on. So they should receive a regular report card if we're just talking about accommodations. Now for go ahead.
I think the intent, we got another question about this as well, is gen ed teachers who really feel like the kids maybe getting this favor, or they're, even if it's an accommodation, that they're getting something other kids aren't. And so they struggle with how to grade that child.
So the the legal answer is the IEP dictates what type of report card your child should be receiving, and it should state in the IEP that they're on a regular report card and or that they're on regular district criteria for promotion or retention. So you can just hand that to the gen ed teacher and say, my child should be receiving a regular report card and they should have access to these accommodations, and these accommodations shouldn't be bringing their grade down in any way. This is what my child needs and has their legal right to access in order to access what you're teaching in your classroom. However, I do understand, and I see it all the time in meetings, and I appreciate actually when gen ed teachers ask these questions and speak up, because it shows that they are involved and, you know, maybe they want to understand better. Because again, if we go back to the credentialing program, they're not getting access to what your special ed teachers are. And so oftentimes they don't know. So I always hold the case manager accountable too. How was this communicated to my child's teacher? Have you gone in and reviewed this page with them? Have you given examples of how these accommodations can and should be implemented and when and, you know, where? Affording the teacher opportunities to ask those questions or to practice or to reach out to you. The case manager is still, you know, supposed to be, particularly when your child is primarily in gen ed classes, they're still responsible for ensuring the IEP is being implemented as it should. And so unfortunately, again, right now, due to COVID, I think there's just so many shortages. It's really hard, right? But it's not an excuse. And so we really have to hold that relationship accountable and making sure that it's happening. And it's even harder, right, when you get to middle school and high school, because now that's for 6 teachers, not just one. And so, you know, really making sure you're checking in with your child's case manager and asking, what are those conversations looking like? How is it going? Do my teachers understand that, or I'm sorry, do my child's teachers understand when and where and how these accommodations should be happening?
Another true and false about A to G classes. And in California, A to G classes are graduation requirements, right? Classes that are, you know, helping you earn that diploma. So you can't take an A to G class if you require modifications. True or false?
So quick correction. So A through G requirements are required for students who want to go to a 4-year university.
That was going to be my follow-up too. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can still get a diploma, but you don't necessarily have to, you don't necessarily have the A through G like level diploma, if you will. You can, so A through G courses, again, same answer as before, as long as the student is performing at the level that would be required of the gen ed student and they're showing the same level of understanding for the standards and they're passing the class, it may be minor, you know, modifications. Yes, they can achieve a diploma, but when it changes the standards or the expectation, that's when we talk about shifting to not a diploma if they aren't able to pass that class.
But a child still can actually be in a class, even if they're getting modifications, they can't earn the credit towards graduation, but they can still actually be in the class.
Oh yeah. There's a difference between being in a class and being, yeah. So of course.
You know, a friend of mine just reached out the other day because her IEP team was saying that her son with Down syndrome could not be in an A to G class because he has modified work. So they weren't even going to let him be in the class. So sadly, I think that's something that, and maybe those, and I think even the high school that we will be at, they used to say the same thing. So it's important for parents to know, again, if you are modifying your child's work, they still can be in those classes, but then the expectation after might be different. Is that right?
Yeah. And I guess I would just say too, so when we talk about higher, like IB classes and AP classes, and then just the class, if the student wouldn't be able to access the much higher rigor and pace of like the IB class or the AP class, but they still want to be in the gen ed class, or obviously should have the right to be in the gen ed class if that's what the IEP team decides. I mean, they're probably not going to put them in like the AP and the IB version, but they can be in the non-version, you know, the regular version of those classes. It just wouldn't make sense. So I think that's definitely a point of discussion. And then when you get to like IB classes and AP classes, then you're talking about college credit too. And so you cannot modify that piece because modifications don't happen in college, only accommodations. So I think that's where it also gets a little tricky, but just general education level classes, absolutely, just like elementary and middle school.
Well, 2 follow-ups to that. First, a clarification of what does a student need to, what are the differences, or what certificate, diploma can make, because I know there's certain things you have to get for 4-year to be eligible for a 4-year college. And I think maybe different. Is it for a 2-year college or community college? And then there's vocational school as well? Or are there any differences in what a child has to earn? Can a student go on to go to any of those options if they don't earn a diploma?
Yes, if I understand your question correctly. So a couple things. Students don't have to acquire a diploma. They can acquire a certificate of completion and still go on to a community college. And I think I was talking with you, maybe it was Lexi, but there are also universities now. I want to say UC Davis was the first of its kind, where there's a 4-year program and even dorm life and all of that for students with significant, intellectual impairment. And so opportunities are definitely opening up and shifting, which is exciting. But you do not need a diploma in order to continue on to college. There are definitely, and again, even for students who are on an alternate curriculum and may, be on that functional life skills curriculum, if you will. Again, there are now a number of colleges that are specifically catering to kind of that population of students, and there are more opportunities for them to go on to that college life.
Right. In a specific program, not.
Yeah.
Right. Is there any difference, and this is just in the back of my head, but so anybody, it doesn't matter if you get a certificate or diploma, that's what you said, right? To go on to a community college, any student, right? And so then the only difference is getting those graduation requirements if you could go to UCLA, or if you go to the UCLA program, possibly for students with intellectual disability, if you don't have your diploma.
Right.
Am I saying that right? Okay. All right, great. Now, and one other thing, when you're saying, absolutely, if your child needs modifications, they can be in a gen ed class. However, it's something, often that IEP teams say, as we've discussed, that can happen. What can a parent say to their IEP team if they're saying, sorry, yep, you have to go into this? Like, what are some tips that parents can take into that IEP if they're being told their child can't be included because they receive modifications?
So ultimately what it comes down to, and what the law says, is that the least restrictive environment is the environment in which the child is as close to their gen ed peers as possible, and that the child or the student is making significant progress on their goals. The law does not say that in order for a student to be or remain in a gen ed class, that they have to be able to access general education curriculum. So what parents should be referring to and looking at is progress on goals, and also, making sure that their goals are written to ensure that your child is making substantial progress. And so what IEP, or I should say school-based teams, like to kind of point out or refer to, at least what I see, in my experiences, is, let's say Bobby is just, he can't identify his letters. We're already in 2nd grade. We're working on, reading, and he's still working on letter sounds and letter identification. And if he keeps in general education, he's just not going to be able to learn. And we just don't, we don't feel that it's fair to him to not be able to make that progress. And if he were in a smaller setting, yada, 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 right? That's kind of what parents hear. Whereas if we look at Bobby's goals, did I say Bobby? Was that the name? I hope so. That he is making progress and he's meeting all of his goals. That's what the parents' argument should be. Well, I understand that Bobby's going to be behind, and honestly, more than likely, he's going to continue to be behind. However, you must have been doing a great job, Mrs. Smith, because he met his goal this year. And not only did he meet it, he exceeded it. So that tells us that this is a great setting and he is learning. And not to mention, socially, he is surrounded by these great peers who also love to play with Bobby, and they're including Bobby, and he's learning from his peer models. Social emotional is a huge piece, right, to inclusion, and part of, just the reason I believe why LRE is written the way that it is. And so school isn't just about academic growth. And that's the reason why the IEP includes social emotional as part of, the IEP in and of itself. So parents just have to kind of highlight those pieces and really look at the progress on goals. If your child is progressing substantially, if we're talking about 5% growth, 10% growth, maybe it isn't the right placement, or maybe they aren't, doing all of what they're supposed to be doing. But if they are progressing and they're making substantial growth in their goals, that is what the law says as far as, is it the least restrictive environment?
And I know we've touched on testing sort of in and out, and there's a lot of questions about testing and some clarifications. So I wanted to jump to those. How do I advocate for my child differently when he or she starts third grade? Because we kind of talked about that testing at third grade. I'm referring to the state tests. What should I add to his IEP to address the state tests?
So again, kind of a broad question, but I would just say state testing doesn't start until third grade. So that's when you'll see it introduced as part of the IEP. There's a whole page. And so it's called the CASP or Smarter Balance, but in the IEP, it says CASP. And so there's language arts or English, math, and then science and PE eventually. They don't all start in the same grades. And so on that page, if they are taking the same test as their gen ed peers, that page will express what accommodations your child will have access to. And it's important to know that whatever accommodations are reflected on that page, and this should be written in the IEP as well, you'll see it, but oftentimes the school team misses this too. Like, let's say you want your child to have a calculator, but they don't have a calculator every day in class. That can't happen. Like, they can only have what they need if they need that on the daily. Does that make sense? So you need to make sure those pages match. And again, there's a drop down and you can ask to see that if you're not sure. There's so many accommodations for the test. So just ask to look through them so you're more educated. But realistically, if you find something on that page, you're like, whoa, I didn't know this was a thing. Make sure your child has it on the other page so they can have it in class too, right? If you're talking about modifications to testing, that would be an alternate state test, which is the CAA, California Alternate Assessment. And that's when, for students who have a significant intellectual impairment, and basically when a student is placed on an alternate curriculum or a functional skills curriculum, the recommendation is made then to switch it to the CAA. And so that test is already heavily modified. And, again, accommodations can be noted, but it's pretty much kind of embedded.
But if a student does qualify for the CAA, does that automatically mean they can't earn a diploma? Does the testing have anything to do with it? What happens at school?
Well, I guess I would say if a student is diploma bound and they're capable of accessing or obtaining a diploma, I should say, then there's no reason they should ever be taking the CAA. Right. So I guess that would be my answer to that. It's really specifically intended for students who, have pretty significant intellectual impairment and wouldn't be able to, like, the state test just really wouldn't be an accurate reflection of their true ability. So, yeah.
And then there was this question, are the requirements for a certificate of completion outlined by the State Department of Ed, the district, or the individual IEP?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll kind of answer it in two parts. So kind of the requirements as far as what's required to earn a certificate of completion, it can be found on the California Department of Education website, as also could be found the diploma. That didn't come out in proper English, but you know what I mean. The diploma requirements as well. That would be dictated from CDE. Who determines if a student should be on a certificate track versus a diploma track is an IEP team decision.
Got it. And I know we are coming up on time, so there's so many other things, so many other questions that I'd like to get to, but I think an important thing to cover is how can a family ensure, like, if they want their child to have accommodations, they want to make sure that nothing's happening at school, that this isn't a surprise, right? That, oh, all of a sudden they show up at the IEP, it's like, we've been modifying everything for your child. Like, what? How can a family, how can a team, ensure that a child is only receiving accommodations if that's what they're shooting for? What can a parent request for the IEP?
So modifications should never occur unless it's written into the IEP and the parent has consented to that. That's point number one. And I will say what you just shared, I've seen happen where we get to a meeting and I'm like, wait a second, why did the teacher just say, he's been receiving modified, coursework or classwork, or why does it say on the accommodations page, modified classwork? So again, sometimes I will say, to be fair, teachers use the terms interchangeably and they may actually be accommodating and just calling it modifying. So, but you, as a parent, you want to make sure, like, hold on, did you just say modify? What does that look like? Show that to me. Because when something is modified, it means that the content that your child is learning is now not the same as it would be for a student that's accessing general education curriculum. What your child is learning has changed. And so the longer that happens, the higher the likelihood that they will struggle to keep up. So you just want to make sure that that may very well be what your child needs, and that's not a bad thing. But if that's not what your child needs and what they really need is just an accommodation, that's the case. And so all of that should be clearly spelled out in the IEP. Did I answer the question?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And if there's any last minute questions, you can throw them in, but we are coming up on an hour and there's so much more ground to cover. We might have to do a second part to this. And we are in a couple of weeks going to be talking about alternate curriculum with Dr. Salone as well. And we're working on an article right now. And I know we've reached out to you, Dr. Pelangka, that's going to be coming out. And I know it was the very beginning of when we started talking, but Donna put in something we finally, we finished editing it this morning, but it's all about what we're talking about today. And it gets in a little deeper in some of those subjects as well, about, where is that fine line? And sometimes it still feels a little murky, but I think, the important things, everything that you kept really driving home is that, regardless of your child's, perceived abilities from whoever, from a young age, right? Let's presume competence. Let's try everything we can, make sure that our teams are trying creative accommodations, not crossing that line without talking to families, making sure that families look at their IEP and know, and state that, they only want accommodations for their child, unless, there needs to be a conversation. Because I also want to say there's nothing wrong with modifications. There's lots of children, that's how they're accessing, that's how they're in gen ed, and it's a fabulous thing, and it's giving them access and it's appropriate for them. So in no way is it a bad thing, but for families who, really want to see where that track is going and keep a close eye, like anything else in your IEP, there needs to be open communication.
Just one more quick thing I think may help clarify really quick is when your child is in gen ed classes and maybe they're on resource pullout, which changes in middle school and high school, the terminology, but they're accessing gen ed curriculum in gen ed and they're being exposed to all of that and being asked to do the same work. But when they're pulled out, their IEP goals may be written to a grade level standard, but they're using maybe a lesser grade level work to work towards that standard. So that's the time that they may not be working on, it may be modified in the sense that they're still practicing a skill to ensure they can keep up in the gen ed class. And in those models, yes, your child is on a regular report card. Your child is still, quote unquote, diploma bound, right? They're still accessing gen ed curriculum, but then that 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day, whatever, they're working on those kind of supplementary skills to ensure they're still able to do that. And that's what would be used to measure their IEP goals, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because there are those questions, like if my child is, being pulled out, but that it doesn't matter, right? It's okay that they're working on those skills. What counts is what's happening in the classrooms and that they're staying on grade level without extensive changes.
Even with what they're accessing in resource time is modified, right?
Right. I mean, this is not easy. I know it confuses me, and I try to put, I like to put things in boxes and say, this is how it is, and this is how it is. And anyone listening on this call knows that it's never that easy. So if you do want or need deeper support, or a one-on-one guide to talk you through your child's creative accommodations or necessary modifications, our Undivided navigators would love to help you through it. So thank you again to Dr. Pelangka, to Iris and Donna, keeping up in the chat. I can't wait to go back and read everything that you guys were talking about, and especially to all of you for stopping by Undivided Learning. Have a beautiful day. See you next week.